So we recently gathered research on how the multifamily industry is viewing smart home technology and what they find important in the decisions around how they implement that technology. I'm Patrick Antrim, the founder and CEO of Multifamily Leadership. I'm here with Kyle Finney to discuss these results. Now, Kyle is the business development manager at Arize. This is an innovative multifamily smart home technology company, and he can give a unique perspective on what that research shows. Kyle, welcome in.
Hey Patrick, great to be back in the studio with you and talking smart tech again.
Well, thanks for coming in. I know we've got a lot of stuff to cover today. When we did this smart home research, 80% of our respondents were executives and also owners. So it's really compelling. And what we did is when we asked our audience, we asked the question, what percent of multifamily units that you own or manage and are equipped with smart home technology? We asked that feedback, and it was pretty interesting in what we found. You can see here on this graph, you're someone that also works closely with multifamily owners and operators. Talk to me about what you're hearing in these conversations.
Well, I mean, from the study, the research study, we see that about half of owners have now implemented some sort of smart tech on a property. And when you look at their portfolios, about 25% of those portfolios are equipped. So if we backtrack a couple years ago, you'll see that adoption was much lower than it is today. So even though that margin of 25% of portfolios have it, which seems like a small number, it's actually on an uptick right now. So more and more owners are starting to adopt it, and the executives, the property management teams they're working with are starting to push it as well.
So with that type of movement in the marketplace on the adoption of smart home technology, what are you seeing around? Some properties already have it. Talk to me about like introducing new partners or maybe even expanding their portfolio of assets within the smart home technology.
Yeah, so I think for owners and managers that already have properties with smart tech, it's always a good idea to explore what's out there because every company offers something different. You might work with other people better, and at the end of the day, you're going to work with people as well as the devices that you're using. So we see a lot of owners testing multiple suppliers at either the same property or across different properties. And we always like to offer the hand to say, hey, we do offer trials, we offer pilot programs. So if you haven't been exposed to smart tech before, it's a great opportunity to be hands-on with it. We treat it as a traditional sale. We walk through the implementation just the same. And for those that already have familiarity with it, it's just another avenue to learn a bit more about another company and see if it is a better fit as far as a partner.
And is that how you're approaching the scale method? Like obviously some of the groups you're working with are larger, right? They have multiple properties, maybe even across multiple states. What is the approach you're recommending? Because you guys have more of a partner approach. When scaling, do you take it all in one partner? Do you test? Do you take me through that?
Yeah, so really from the very first conversation, we're never just trying to look at one property because chances are if you're going to implement on one property, you're going to implement across your portfolio or a part of that portfolio. So we take a look at, hey, down the road, where do you see yourselves implementing smart tech and on what properties? We'll look into what solutions are going to fit best for those specific properties and then roll it out that way. So they might start at one to prove the concept. If they're happy with that there, then they'll roll it out either in the same market or take to a portfolio outside of that state and implement there as well.
How are you seeing these conversations going? Can you do this stuff without breaking the bank?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So when we're talking about budgeting, we understand that you have to underwrite things into your budget. So we're always making sure to, say, hey, this is what your hard costs per door is going to be. And then we'll talk about if you charge X amount of dollars a month as a rent premium, how long is that going to take before you break even there? And then we also look into things like, I recommend talking to like cost seg guys to see what kind of tax breaks you can get. We'll also look into rebate programs for, say, like a thermostat. Sometimes there's one-time rebates that you can get, but also annual that'll be shown as a bill credit. So we really like to dig in and not just say, hey, buy these devices and charge your residents back to make the money. So there's a lot more value when working with a partner like us.
And is that your partnership approach? Is that the differentiator that you're going for?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I've talked to so many owners and managers that haven't had these types of conversations, and some of them have already implemented things like thermostats, and they didn't even know there were rebates available. And so, you're missing out on money and a lot of value, and really what smart home tech can do for the property and the business.
Yeah, that's really great. So let's talk a little bit more about that ROI, the NOI growth. What are the things you're saying to groups as you're inside these conversations right now?
So obviously we do try to show the ROI, and also what that increase in asset value is going to look like. So if you're, the type of business model where you're going to buy and hold for a 3 to 5 year period, you might want to break even before you refi or before the sale happens, and you want to achieve total cost of ownership during that time. So, we'll look at the per door cost. Oftentimes, Arize is going to come in much lower because the way that we own our supply chain and the partnerships that we have with our different manufacturers. So yeah, we're always going to give that per door costs. That way they can underwrite it and plug it into the pro forma, see how that's going to play out over the course of 3, 5, 7, whatever that hold period might be.
You're talking about hold periods and thinking longer term. This and you showed in the data that it was once a nice to have, looking at it as an amenity, and during a market where everybody was really doing great on leasing, so the demand, it wasn't that they needed this to lease up their properties, but now it's more of that nice to have. What are you seeing happen?
So I think at a certain point it was a nice to have, but when you really dig into the operational and economic benefits, it starts to become more of a cost of doing business. And the reason I say that is you look at where rents are now, and if you keep charging residents more and more rent, but you're not providing anything different, they're more apt to leave, find something else. And if you're just simply providing something where it's justified in that rental increase, something like a smart lock or smart thermostat, things like that, it gives them something to kind of keep them. And retaining residents is it's a whole lot. It just has a better bottom line effect than having to turn over and all those turn costs.
Yeah, and we have evidence going back to all the amenities that residents do drive those investments in these properties. So we asked our audience, how comfortable are you with smart home technology? And looking at this graph, you can see there are some out there that are not comfortable with it. And it's the more complex the product is and the offer is, it takes time to understand these things. And there are people out there that still need some education. What are you seeing? What do you think it is for those that are just not comfortable with it? What's your feedback on that?
I really think it just comes down to, if you're not familiar with any type of tech, it's going to seem kind of scary, and you kind of shy away from it. And, I think there's a lot of people in the market that maybe take the Google approach to get answers to these questions, as opposed to maybe talking to other owners, talking to other managers, talking to, industry partners, things like that. So I think for those out there that are uncomfortable, it's just a matter of having a conversation and making it more of a consistent conversation so they can feel more comfortable and be comfortable asking questions and whatnot.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you coming on this interview, because this will help people also further understand things. Because, yeah, if you're asking your friends and your friends haven't gone down the road, then, chances are you're not going to get to the information. So it's interesting you say that. Do you feel like there's an uncertainty with how this technology works, or is it? I think some would say, well, okay, I get it. It makes sense. I can see modern things in the world I live in, but maybe they don't understand. They're making a purchase decision on behalf of an investor or owner, and they just don't fully understand how it works.
Yeah, I mean, see that quite a bit. Over the last couple of years that I've been doing this, that's a conversation I have almost daily. And so it's, our job to educate, and I think the value comes in understanding what the operational and economic benefits are, and then also just talking to multiple providers to see what they're offering. That way they, as a manager, you can take ownership of that and feel confident in relaying to, your owner, hey, this is, this is going to be the best route. This is the value that it's going to provide. This is what it's going to do for our bottom line. And yeah, just taking advantage of all that.
To your point, this sometimes can feel like a purchasing decision. Like I am here today, and this is the year we're in, and this is the products that are available. What I like about your approach is the partnership way, where it's not just it goes beyond a sales conversation, where after you make the purchase, you guys are staying along the journey to help understand the evolution of where things go next. Take me through that.
Yeah, so during the sales process, we try to address the whole picture, because, like I said, we want to be a partner for the long term, and we don't just look at that one property. So when we are having that conversation, we'll lay out what implementation looks like. We'll lay out what installation is going to look like. We'll talk about time periods, what staff members need to be involved, where we need to get involved if there's a construction schedule and things like that. And yeah, beyond that, beyond the sale, after we leave, we're still continuing to do training, and then we're constantly talking about, okay, we've already addressed this at the very beginning of our conversation, and where are we going in the future? What properties are you going to want to implement this on, and what's the ultimate goal, the business goal that you're trying to achieve in implementing? Because for some properties it may not make sense. For some properties it's going to make more sense. So we want to align with our clients on that.
Yeah, no, I love the partnership stuff. I mean, in structuring loans, we have our lending teams and our financial teams and our advisors that get us to the best outcomes for the investment objectives, if that be short-term or long-term structures. And even in the legal world, we rely on outside parties to guide great decisions. And I really like the approach you guys are taking. Instead of just business development and sales, here's some hardware, here's a service, here's some software, but really structuring it to where these investment operators can lean on other groups to stay in the know, to know what are the great questions to ask, and how does that impact the type of portfolio I'm set out to build here. So I think that's a great approach. Now, moving beyond the partnership conversation into the motive, right? The results and the outcomes that come from, I think it was like 54% talk about the property owners maximize their profits as a top concern, right? The whole goal is, how do we create some more value? We understand residents love it and all that stuff, but also the efficiencies with staff and teams. Talk me through some of those business outcomes.
Yeah, so I think inherently each device offers a set of benefits, whether it's strictly economics or it's operations that affect the economics. So when we break down these different devices like smart locks, if you're coupling that with a software solution to set up self-guided tours so someone can book something online without having to interact with the leasing staff, you're not taking time away from that leasing staff for doing other things. So you're saving on man hours there. It also just makes the resident experience a lot better for a lot of people, especially younger generations. They just want to be left alone while they tour a prospective living situation. So yeah, I think when it comes down to it, it's just understanding that there are benefits and asking those questions to figure out what those are.
Take me through what would be some of those questions, like what?
So some of the questions I get all the time is, if I'm going to implement a lock and it's going to cost X amount of dollars and I can charge $30 more a month, and I'm going to break even at this point, that's fine and dandy, but what else is there, right? And so I tend to ask questions like, what's the demographic at the property? Do you get a lot of people losing keys? So lockouts, are you changing physical locks at every turn, or are you just rekeying? Either way, there are hard costs, and if you can mitigate those hard costs by just clicking a few buttons on your computer to change a code, you're going to save time and actual money on hardware in that way. And then with thermostats, there's always energy savings. So when we dig into that, I always tell people to ask, if you're vetting other providers, ask what rebates are available. You'd be surprised that some providers are not even aware of that. So I think it's important to ask questions like that, to really dig into or dig past the surface level kind of things of residents want this, and we know we can get more value out of it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because what you just said there, I went to, the expense is already there. They're already paying for this expense, probably more than probably the investment in the technology and the ecosystem, because in many ways that expense is not improving the asset value. because you're doing the keys, you're not as efficient on the turns. The leasing agents are spending time on the wrong things or spending more on utilities. Although whatever that may be, that expense is going out the door, and it's not being evaluated as if a new buyer comes in to an apartment building and it is equipped with this technology. The assumption is, well, we don't have to do that. And the second assumption is we'll lease faster, we'll have better efficiencies, and they'll start doing the math on the savings on utilities and all that stuff. But if you're not investing in that technology, the money may be already there, right? It's just not it's not capitalized this way. So
Yeah, exactly. And if you look at properties that don't have it versus properties that do have smart tech, I mean, the asset value is, for those that have already implemented, they understand the economics of it. And so, in talking to someone that's going to buy that property, it's much easier to relay that information and have that owner see like, oh, this is something that does make sense economically and is part of the business plan.
Yeah, very true. All right, so we asked our audience on the how comfortable are you with smart home technology? And we asked them also, and you can see here on the slide, what would make you comfortable adding smart home technology to your portfolio? And it was interesting, clear, thought out plan to implement that details how it saves money and again increases value. So that seems to be the driver. If you can bring that value, chances are the technology is going to scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we talked about earlier, once we get into that sales process, we are outlining that clear plan, not only operationally, but what that ROI is going to look like, what the economics look like. And as partners, we have to understand our clients' businesses almost just as well as they do, right? So in doing so, it's much easier to have that conversation of, okay, this is where we're going to start at point A. This is when point B is going to happen and what's involved in that. If we're talking about deposits and what it's going to take to initiate a deal, we make that very clear. And then once again, we always go back to at what point are you going to break even? What point are you going to? And then what does that extra NOI look like? And how does that impact the asset value? Because sometimes if you might implement something that costs $100,000, but in doing so, if you can justify a rent premium of say $30 a unit or whatever it is, you might increase the value of that asset by $500,000 or $1 million on a $100,000 investment. So we like to lay that out, and I really like to dive into the numbers once we get things going and lay out what that whole process is going to look like.
Yeah, it gets you excited. So what do you think keeps people from not taking action? Because they'll see the numbers, right? They see the value. They see everyone in the world doing it, but still some don't say yes right away. What is that?
I think, there's just, if you look at the adoption curve, that bell curve, there's always going to be some late adopters that really just want to have confirmation of, okay, this is something that people are doing and it's something that works and this is what's working about it. And just having more conversations, sometimes I'll talk to people and, they're all gung-ho about it and they don't do anything for a year. And sometimes I talk to people and they say, hey, do you know anybody in my market that's using this? And they just need that confirmation that, hey, this is going to work, it does work, the money makes sense. So yeah, I love having those conversations.
Yeah, I know it's exciting to talk through those things, and in many ways, real estate asset managers and operators it's all about risk management, right, and avoiding risk. And so trying new things sometimes can feel scary, but it feels like you guys have a confident plan to move people through understanding those decisions. One other thing, Kyle, that we talked to in our audience, more than 88% of multifamily owners and operators currently had a property in development. That stat was surprising to me. And so the question I have for you is, like, when building and going down the development path, at what stage should these companies start to involve you in these conversations?
So I think obviously everyone wants to be involved as early as possible, but I think the benefit to that is understanding budget right away. So if you're going into a new development, once you start planning and you're budgeting things like even flooring, countertops, things like that, it's also a good time to just get pricing on what that purchase cost is going to look like. And then beyond that, once we get the cost settled, then we'll talk about, okay, at what point do we fit into the construction schedule? And so for new developments, generally it's, once you have drywall up and you got cover plates on the outlets and there's paint on the doors, all the devices are plug and play, and that applies to almost every supplier out there. So really once you have those things squared away, whether it's a new dev or a rehab, then we can come in and plug those devices in. So I think looking at it from those two approaches, talking about the money in the very beginning, and then talking about when the devices will actually physically be on the property, those are two questions to answer right away.
That's a great response. I can, going through the development process myself, it's just another opportunity to create value, and especially if you already have that development. And I'd love to lean in a little bit more to the people that aren't in development, that they have either retrofit or they're just doing these on turns, or however they're looking through that. Talk me through how that works too.
So work a lot with people that are just doing rehabs. So they'll buy a property and just part of their renovation plan. So like I said, we'll get with construction managers if we need to, or we'll just try to line up, once again, like just let us know when there's paint on the walls, the drywall is finished, and there's paint on the doors. And for some, if we get in early enough, sometimes there's already door handles on those. But in the case that they were going to swap those out, instead of going out and buying new door handles to put on the locks and new deadbolts to put on the doors, we'd say, press pause on that. Let's see what it's going to cost to just put the smart locks on, and then go that route. And then even with stabilized properties, obviously budgeting there, it's a little bit tighter because a CapEx expense like smart tech is going to be an outlier in what their normal running costs are. So we'll take a look at how we can save on operation costs for the stabilized properties. So a lot of times, if they're looking to cut back on staff hours, then locks are a good way. But also thermostats is just it's a great value for whether it's a new development, rehab, or a stabilized property when you start to look at those rebates. So we'll line up the thermostat and what rebates are being provided by the power companies in that city, and we'll just once again walk through that process of, okay, implement, this is what your hard cost is going to be, and in 24 months it will have paid for itself in full, and now you're able to charge that back to the residents. They're saving money on their power bill, you're saving money on your power bill, and everybody wins.
Yeah, and educating them on that process, that's great. Going through this research, what we also found was, and even in the open comments, the open responses, in that multifamily development and the timelines of which, even sometimes construction timelines, and in rehab timelines, or even in how fast the world works or is moving, in a lot of concerns around the technology at some point becoming outdated. How are you talking through people with that?
I mean, I think everybody can relate to that. You look at the rate of which technology is evolving on a day-to-day basis. Something that Arize has implemented is as a lease model. So it's similar to how you'd lease a car. You're going to lease a car for whatever that payment is going to be. It's going to be a short-term contract, 2 to 3 years. And within that, it's going to include maintenance, and everything that's included with that car. So when we look at smart home devices and what that looks like as far as technology becoming outdated and obsolete, leasing is always a great option because you'll implement, what your fixed rate cost is going to be each month. And we're always iterating on our current products, and we have new products in development. So anytime we have a new iteration of a product or we have a new device, we'll call you up and say, hey, we have this, you're already paying for it, so we're going to come out and swap the old products out for the new ones. And once that lease contract ends, you can choose to renew. If we have any new devices, once again, we'll swap those out as well.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I think in terms of we're all going through those purchasing behaviors outside of multifamily. It makes sense to think through it like that. I'm going to look at my research notes here, and a huge concern for some of the multifamily properties is the expense of adding smart home to the portfolio. It's really just the dollars in that sense. we found the number one selector for providers was comparing prices. And then the most common issues preventing smart home technology implementation was the cost. Do you have any thoughts on overcoming the objection of it being too difficult to fit into the budget?
Yeah, so I think those conversations, once again, I have those all the time. It's really digging deeper into the ROI. We'll look into operational savings. We'll dig into the history of the property, like say for water leaks. If you know you're spending 20, 30 grand on water damage every single year, and you're just putting it in as a line item on the budget each year, well, why don't we start to look at what it'd take to implement water leak sensors in the units that are leaking, and say it costs 15 grand and you're spending 30 grand every year on water damage, and you can get ahead of that, you've cut your costs in half. So it's looking at things like that to make it feel more comfortable in saying, okay, this actually does make sense, it's going to cut back on costs, and so making that investment is going to achieve a greater return than not implementing it.
True story, true story. And many properties, I have a note here, many properties from our responses, they already have some level of smart home technology in them. And for those scenarios, how do you integrate if you're already down the road, you've tried some technology, you have some hardware, how does that work with you guys?
So Arize is super flexible with the way that we operate. So anything that's client driven, we'll augment our staff, we'll augment our product offerings to make sure that we're able to satisfy not only that client, but the market in general. So whether it's software integrations that someone brings to the table, we've been known to augment our development team and get that integration done, as quickly as we can. And then same with hardware. There's a lot of properties that are equipped with smart home tech from providers that are not in the industry anymore. And so we'll take a look at what we can do to, buy those products back and maybe sell them to, another supplier or someone else that can use those products. But also take a look at, what can we piggyback off of? And if they're looking for a specific device and we're not integrated with them, if they want it, we'll go ahead, to our development team and say, hey, let's get this hardware integration completed so that, we can continue working with them. And that's just the partnership angle once again.
Yeah, it keeps coming back to that, the partnership angle. There's not one trained individual that can take this on for these organizations. I think leaning on partners is a great due diligence item. People are expecting, in our research, people are expecting to buy smart home technology for their portfolio this year, or looking forward the next 12 months. But what we're seeing is over 80% said that they were likely to buy smart home tech for their properties within the next year. What are you seeing on the demand of that? Like, we know the operators were doing the math, the ROI, NOI, all that growth stuff, and looking at the expense, but what are you seeing on the demand side of it from residences?
So on the demand side is really just a couple core devices that everybody's looking into. So we have locks and thermostats. Those will always rank towards the top. And then you have sensors. So like water leak sensors, maybe like smart smoke detectors, things like that. And I think the demand from the resident side is coming from convenience and just being around technology and having their lives be more interconnected with that. So once you start using a smart lock, it's just one of those things that becomes, something like if you use Alexa all the time, and if you can unlock your door by saying, hey, Alexa, unlock my door, that's going to be a convenience factor for you. Same thing with the temperature. If you can control devices without having to be in your home, I think that's what's really driving it home on the resident side.
Yes, very true. And that's only going to accelerate from here. One of the things that was really fascinating in the research was the devices, or really the results that were the difference between the devices that somebody would use at home and then also the devices that somebody would implement, right, in multifamily, and how they found that important. Let's look at the graph on that. Here's some data for the graph that shows what are you seeing on these results? Somebody that's familiar with smart home technology, and maybe they're using this at home, but then what is worth implementing in a multifamily property?
So once again, we find that we have the locks and the thermostats at the top, and then the sensors again. So I think everybody sees the value in those core devices, but when it comes to implementing on an actual property, I think every property has different things going on with it. So there's going to be different problems to solve at each property versus your home that you're at every day. So people have different problems and properties have different problems. So I think with the breadth of devices that are available, it's just breaking it down, boiling it down to what does this property actually need versus just putting them all on for no reason.
Yeah, it goes back to your point and when to involve you in the development process or in the retrofit process, getting you guys active early. I'm sure you're open to have those conversations with prospective clients or people that are thinking through this to help them, guide them in what's next.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We always take a consultative approach at the very beginning, and once we've earned that trust and provided some value, then we look to really build out that partnership and that relationship.
Right. I do see that foundation in place. So Kyle, do you have any other thoughts on the research that we went through and you saw a lot of that data? Any other thoughts on that?
I think we're at a point where if you're not in the game, it's about time to get in the game. And I say that, if you're at a property and you're looking at comps and what everybody's doing around you, at some point, somebody's going to implement some sort of smart tech package. And if you're not, you might start to lose residents to that, whether it's because it's just more attractive, that other property is more attractive, or rents are increasing and the residents aren't getting anything for that upcharge. So they're going to want to move. So I think if you're hesitant to get in the game, I would start talking to companies like Arize, doing trials if people offer that, and just getting your hands a little dirty, and talk about it. Talk about the numbers, ask the hard questions, and really dig into, is this going to make sense for this property? If not, will it make sense for another property? And what that entire process looks like.
Right, and so talk to me a little bit about how people can get in touch with you. We'll put a card on the screen so the viewers can see, how to reach out and connect with you or even the company. But what's the best way to do that?
So we did create a special link for this episode. So it'll be arizehub.com/multifamily leadership. You can request a demo or just call us directly from there. And then you can always find me on LinkedIn, it's Kyle Finney. And then we will be at OpTech in November, booth number 1144. So people can schedule a demo with us beforehand if you want to hang out during the event after, and then the Multifamily Innovation Summit, which my birthday's on the 8th, and I'll be there. I'll be celebrating.
That's great.
With you. Yeah.
Well, thank you for celebrating with us. Exciting times ahead. And again, if you're at OpTech or you're at the Multifamily Innovation Summit, come see these guys. They're doing some great things. And I love the way that they think about things in the big picture in long term, because that's technology and how things operate. So we'll see you guys in the next show.